make sure you have your Unit 9 multiplying and dividing integer notes out in front of you. We're going to get started with reviewing what multiplication is. So I'll tell you when we're going to be writing in our notes. If I gave you the problem 2 times 3, and I said, what does this mean? Many of you would say, well, 6. And well, that's what it equals, but what does this mean? It means you have 2 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 2. Multiplication is repeated addition. So 2 groups of 3 would look like this, and we know that that equals 6. Or 3 groups of 2 would look like this, 2 plus 2 plus 2, and we know that that equals 6. So multiplication is repeated addition, and we're going to use that as we multiply integers. And we're also going to use what we learned about multiplying integers for dividing integers, since multiplication and division are inverse operations of each other. So, not going to our notes yet, but I'm going to show you the very first problem in your notes. You don't have to write anything down yet, just look up here. So the very first problem in your notes is 2 times a negative 3. And remember that parenthesis is there just to isolate that negative sign. So 2 groups of negative 3, or take away 3 groups of 2. Let's start with the first one, 2 groups of negative 3. So if I have 2 groups of negative 3, it would look like this. Negative 3 plus negative 3. You're at negative 3. Turn and face the negative. Take 3 steps further in the negative direction. You're going to be at negative 6. Or this problem can mean take away 3 groups of 2. So look at this. There's taking away 1 group of 2. There's taking away 2 groups of 2. There's taking away 3 groups of 2. And you might go like, wait a second, Miss Kluver, I thought you said multiplication is repeated addition. Well, in this sense, I could also write it as right? These two essentially are the same. So don't let that fool you. If you are at 0 and you're taking away a 2, taking away another 2, taking away another 2, you're taking further and further, or you're traveling further and further into negative land. This is going to equal negative 6, as this would also equal negative 6. So the product for 2 times a negative 3 is negative 6. And now 6 is a part of 2 times 3, isn't it? So really when it comes to the multiplying and dividing, 6th graders, you're going to multiply and divide like you know how, right? But the main thing is you have to determine if your product or your quotient is a positive or a negative. All right? So don't write anything down in your notes yet, because I'm going to do the next problem in your notes, and I want you just to look at it. So the next problem in your notes just changes a little bit. I changed the 2 to a negative 2. And now this answer is still going to have a 6 involved, except we have to know, is it going to be a positive 6 or a negative 6? So let's look at what this problem means. Take away 2 groups of negative 3. So there's taking away 1 group of negative 3. There's taking away 2 groups of negative 3. Or take away 3 groups of negative 2. I'm just using 0 as a starting point here, 6th graders. There's taking away 1 group of negative 2, taking away 1 group of negative 2, taking away 2 groups of negative 2, taking away 3 groups of negative 2. And now we know that 2 minus signs directly next to one another, they simplify to be a positive. So this problem really is 3 plus 3. And these 2 minuses, well, they're going to simplify to be positives, right? You're taking away the negative. And this simplifies to be 2 plus 2 plus 2. And well, what's 3 plus 3? 6. What's 2 plus 2 plus 2? 6. So what's negative 2 times negative 3? Here we showed what it means. What do we get our answers to be? Positive 6. Now let's look at these 2 problems, 6th graders. What's the one thing that's different? I have 1 negative here. I have 2 negatives here. Determining the sign of your answer when you're multiplying or dividing has to do with how many negatives are part of the problem. Now let's finally go to our notes, because I'm not going to make you do this every time you have to figure out the answer. I'm going to give you a shortened way to say all of that. So now going to our notes for the first time. If there is an odd number of negative signs, the answer is going to be negative. If there is an even number of negative signs, the answer is going to be positive. What do you mean by that, Mrs. Kluber? Well, I will show you. One negative sign. One is a negative number. Look at my product. Two negative signs. 2 is an even number. Look at my product. Positive. So if you have an odd number of negative signs, the answer is negative. If you have an even number of negative signs, the answer is positive. So when we look at our problem, just multiply the numbers. It's like you're taking the absolute value of 2 times the absolute value of negative 3. That'd be 2 times 3, right? Which is 6. But now look, how many negatives are in the problem? 1. 1 is an odd number, so my product is going to be negative. The next one, negative 2 times negative 3, we'll just take the absolute value, multiply the values together. So the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. But now look at your negative signs. How many are there? 2. 2 is an even number, so an even number of negative signs, our answer is going to be positive, positive 6. And that's what we got when we showed all of this work. And now you don't have to do this every time, but you can see how this shortcut came to be. Look at our next problem. We have negative 8 times negative 1 times negative 2. Just take the absolute value of each one of these terms. So it'd be 8 times 1 times 2. Multiply them together. 8 times 1 is 8, times 2 is 16. But now look at how many negatives you have. 1, 2, 3. Is 3 an even or an odd number? It's an odd number. So that means my product is going to be negative 16. Looking at the last one here, you're just going to multiply 1 times 10 times 7. 1 times 10 is 10. Times 7 is 70. And now look at how many negatives you have. I have 1, 2. Is 2 an even or an odd number? Even. So if we have an even number of negative signs, the answer is going to be positive. So it's going to be a positive 70. The same works for division, 6th graders. So we have 54 divided by negative 9. Just take the absolute value. So absolute value of 54 is 54 divided by the absolute value of negative 9 is 9. So 54 divided by 9 is 6, sorry. And now how many negatives do you have? You have 1. So that's an odd number. Odd number of negative signs, the answer is, you can't see that. Odd number of negative signs, the answer is negative. So this is going to be a negative 6. We have negative 88 divided by negative 11. Remembering that fraction bar is a division sign. So 88 divided by 11 is 8. It's a sloppy 8, Mrs. Kluber. Now how many negatives do you have? 2. Is 2 an even or an odd number? Even. So my quotient is going to be positive. So when you take negative 88 and you divide it by negative 11, you're going to get positive 8. Last one, we have negative 100 divided by negative 10 divided by negative 2. First, to get the quotient, just divide the absolute value of all these numbers. So this would be 100 divided by 10 divided by 2. So 100 divided by 10 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now, count how many negative signs you have. 1, 2, 3. Is 3 an even or an odd number? Odd. So our quotient is going to be negative. So again, when you are multiplying or dividing integers, 6th graders, really, it's like multiplying and dividing how you already know how to do it. But then afterwards, you have to ask yourself, how many negatives are in my expression, in my problem? Is it an even number of negatives? If so, your product or quotient is positive. Is it an odd number of negatives? If so, your product or quotient is negative.